I've got to start with the obvious question. What's happening now? Who's going to go forward and form a coalition from your perspective?
Well, there is no certainty here. There is no clear winner. There are no clear losers. So both the Conservatives and the Social Democrats will try to take the Prime Minister post. Neither of those have a clear majority behind them. Well, but at the same time, I think the Swedish economy is very strong. We have a very robust public finances and we have a very credible framework. So I think this will have a very limited impact on the markets going forward.
Just in the very short term, we've seen the Swedish krona sort of catch a few bids this morning. It is rising marginally against the dollar. Why do you think that is?
A slight relief reaction. The Social Democrats could have done much worse, the Conservative could have done much worse, and the Swedish Democrats much better. So I think from the established parties, this is a little bit of a relief. And now I think economic policy will be to some extent be on autopilot, and therefore I think the market takes a kind of also a relief.
Mm-hmm. I suppose one of the questions that a lot of foreign observers will be asking is to what extent the Sweden Democrats will get some sort of a say in Swedish politics going forward. A lot of folks were sort of saying before this, hang on a minute, if we can see a populist surge in Sweden, to what extent is that part of the more general movement towards populism in Europe, and what are the implications of that?
Well, I think the problem is that the Swedish Democrats is obviously quite a populistic party, so I don't think any of the established parties are willing to base their government on them. There could be issues where you cooperate, and it's pretty clear that they have already won the issue of migration. There will be very, very limited migration coming into Sweden in the next 4 years, and I think the Social Democrats and the moderates are really hoping that in itself will make the issue less tense, and that we therefore could be in a position where the Swedish Democrats have peaked for this time.
Right. You were saying earlier that the Swedish economy in and of itself at the moment is quite strong, but I suppose the question or the question marks will start to form a little bit further down the line if in a few years' time the global economy slows down, and with that Swedish exports, for instance. Would a Swedish government, whatever it looks like, be ready then in this kind of parliamentary situation, be ready to take on a potential crisis, potential pitfalls going forward?
Well, I mean, if I look at the companies where I serve on the boards, I would say that it's pretty clear that the economy is strong, people are investing, demand is good. So I think for the corporate Sweden side, this is a strong situation. One should not expect any negative policy measures for our competitiveness. This brings the tax hikes to an end. This ends the discussion on profit limitation in the welfare sector. So in that respect, I think for the business sector, this is a little bit of a relief. There is a small potential maybe for structural reforms, but I think we will basically expect this to be status quo. So the big dark clouds of the Swedish economy is really the high indebtedness and the financial instability, and I don't think anything will be done about that. So in the
You're talking about household indebtedness.
Absolutely. So in the next global downturn, it could be quite a severe crisis for Sweden, but that could take 1 or 2 or 3 years before it happens. So for the short term, I think there is a little bit of relief, no political catastrophe. There will be no turns to the left in economic policy, and we have a very robust framework.
Speaking of the next global downturn, this week we here at Bloomberg, and a lot of other journalists as well for that matter, are marking the 10th anniversary of the collapse of Lehman Brothers, which really got the financial crisis underway in earnest. 10 years on, do you think that markets, politicians have learnt the lessons of the Lehman crisis?
Well, to an extent. We have made our banking system in Europe and the US much, much robust. But at the same time, we are seeing global indebtedness going to a record level. It's not only Sweden, it's the rest of the Nordic areas. You see the same in China, and you have a number of countries that is struggling with weak public finances. So we will have economic instability coming back. That is pretty clear.
And what about the readiness of the system in and of itself of dealing with that instability that you were just mentioning? You were finance minister during the crisis itself. If you compare then and now, where are we?
I mean, for Sweden, I would say that we are actually in a more vulnerable position this time, because we were under threat of the collapse in Latvia and Iceland the last time. This time I think it's much more our own banking system, our own house prices, our own indebtedness that makes us vulnerable. And we all know that a debt crisis takes a long time to deal with. So I think the Swedish economy is actually more vulnerable this time than it was back in 2008.
What about the rest of Europe?
Well, obviously the euro crisis will come back with a bigger magnitude if Italy would go in the direction of Greece, and I don't think we can write that off yet. So I think Europe is still vulnerable. There are fields of uncertainty in the global economy, so I think we need to be very cautious.
You say that we can't write off the potential of a crisis in Italy just yet. What are you going to be watching very briefly going forward, specifically when it comes to Italy?
I think it's the political side that makes it so uncertain. It's pretty clear that Lega Nord has made a lot of gains in terms of popularity given the stance they've taken. If they now back down and if they are not taking Brussels on, I think there will be a lot of disappointment, and then we might see instability coming back in Italy.